and welcome to a Modern Sales Pros event. I'm super excited to get started on this awesome topic with our two amazing speakers that we have here today. But I'll give folks a couple more minutes to trickle in. We don't want to get started before everyone kind of joins in, but I'd love to ask our panelists, Bala and Tyler, a fun icebreaker question. In North America, it is the summer months and we are at August, so that just means that summer is ending soon. I'd love to ask if you, Bala or Tyler, what your last minute summer plans are before the summer wraps up. Tyler, how about you go first?
Oh, man, I was hoping I was going to deflect the ball up, but I guess I'm stuck with that. I don't really have anything major. There's two things like really happening in my world right now. We decided to do a massive paver project ourselves, so the backyard is in a state of disarray, and we're laying pavers as we speak. And then in September we leave for Italy, so we'll be in the northern part of Italy in the Dolomites and Lake Garda area. So it's kind of like the last hurrah of summer, and then we're ready for deep freeze. I don't know.
It's amazing. Italy sounds
I just got back from Africa after 3 weeks, so I'm just slightly getting back into the swing of things. But have one more trip to go see the folks, and that's pretty much it in Toronto. So.
Oh, Toronto. I used to live in Toronto. I hear I moved to Vancouver last year, last August. So
Nice.
Toronto represent. I hear the weather hasn't been great there, but hopefully when you do go and visit your folks, there's some sun
Yeah.
over there. Amazing. Well, sounds like Italy and Toronto, those are both amazing, great places. Thank you for sharing, and we'll get started. So today's topic, unlock territory potential, best practices for managing sales territory planning challenges. But before we begin, I'll say a few words about the team at Modern Sales Pros. Hello, everyone. My name is Angelica. I'm one of the community event managers at MSP. And for those of you who are not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. Our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they struggle to solve on their own and help them to see around corners they may not know about. We do this through live sessions like the one you're at today. We also have an online robust forum, and we also have our quarterly summits, and we have our in-person events, which I'll talk about in our next slide. So if you're not already a part of Modern Sales Pros, you'll be invited to join right after this event. And speaking of our in-person events, Dreamforce is back this year. So if you're headed to Dreamforce in San Francisco in September, and if you're an MSP member, stop by and come meet the Modern Sales Pros community in person for a fun happy hour on September 12th. You can register for free in this link right here that I'll drop in the chat. So I hope to see you there. And some housekeeping notes. This event is being recorded, so if you have a friend or a colleague that couldn't make it, rest assured you'll be able to view the recording along with the key takeaways and any blog posts and articles mentioned on the MSP website before the end of the day. And if you have a question for Bala and Tyler, please use the Q&A function at the top right-hand corner or leverage the chat. You'll see that I've asked a few questions there, so feel free to drop your questions there and we'll be sure to get them live. Now, enough about MSP. I'm super pleased to announce our sponsor for today's session, Fullcast.io. Fullcast is the only RevOps platform that seamlessly connects GTM planning with tactical execution. Fullcast users experience dramatically improved RevOps efficiency, sales performance, and talent retention. You can learn more about Fullcast in this link here that I'll drop in the chat, and be sure to check them out. They're doing awesome things. Now I'm going to introduce our panelists today, Tyler and Bala. I'll actually pass it off to Tyler to do his introduction, and then I'll come back for closing remarks. Tyler, take it away.
Hello, everybody. Tyler, Head of Customer Success at Fullcast. I guess I don't really need to do much intro on Fullcast, so I think from there, I'll pass it right over to Bala so we can leave plenty of time to talk about our topic today.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today. My name is Bala Bhaskar. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Fullcast. And we are, as Angelica mentioned, a SaaS platform that is helping customers with RevOps challenges that they face day to day from planning to execution. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those challenges today in our discussion, and hopefully, if you have any questions, we'll be able to address those at the end of the session here.
Great. I think we will. Oh, look at that. I will actually take control of that if I can. So there we go. Cool. All right. Unlocking territory potential. Bala, you and I did a lot of prep work for this, and we kind of talked through all these different challenges because I think there's a lot of them. And where we ended up was really wanting to start kind of at this like beginning piece, right? Like understanding our customers, what does that mean? And so I think for us, let's just start at the beginning. And as we go through this, we'll kind of layer in all these challenges as you go through planning throughout the different stages of your company journey. So let's talk about understanding our customers. What do you think are the biggest?
And to your point, Tyler, we wanted to sort of step back and look at why we built territories in the first place. I know it can sort of become a motion where you just have somebody, a sales rep, and you want to give them a territory. But what does that mean? Why do we have territories, and why do we build these things in the way that we do? And so we wanted to take a few minutes at the beginning of this discussion to sort of set the stage for what is a territory, and what are some of the things that you're trying to achieve as you go about your go-to-market planning. And the stage that we set here hopefully will resonate when we start talking about challenges and how to solve them and how to deal with them, because having this why in mind really helps us sort of be very focused on how we solve those challenges, which we'll discuss further in this webinar. So really, the idea of putting together territories or as part of your planning process really starts with bringing together what I believe are three very important things in terms of your go-to-market strategy, right? So one is really understanding your customers. We'll dig into that a little bit here, but really understanding your customers, trying to segment them in a way that allows you to match their buying or discovery journey or customer journey with your company. And there's a number of strategies for doing that, and we'll cover a few of those. But really, the idea then is once you understand the segments and the complexity of those interactions and where the customer is in their journey, the goal as an organization should be to match that journey with strategies that can support the customer through that process, right, and their interaction with the organization. So we'll talk a little bit about models and programs that you can use to do that. But what comes together here is really kind of trying to match the interaction that the customer is having with your organization, with the resources in the organization to sort of support that customer through that process. And then once you've done that, the idea then is to take all of the resources that are at your disposal. So this will be your salespeople, your revenue folks, your SDRs, your sales engineers, and whoever else is part of the revenue lifecycle, and deploy them in a way that you can actually set goals and objectives and really try to drive efficiency and ROI in that process. So you're bringing together these three ideas into the planning process, and naturally the territory becomes that vessel that you can do that with. And when we talk about territory here, we're not talking about your grandpa's territory that is very much geographical based, and that's about the concept. So here, really territories over the last few years have evolved into essentially a book of business that is created for the different roles to support the customer journey, right? And that book of business can be created based on geographic ideas, but it could also be created based on a number of other notions like industries or pooling or needs or life cycle based or lifetime value based. So there is at the end of the day, the territories sort of become that vessel where you can tie all of these three ideas together to really drive success in the market. So we'll cover a few of those things and some of the approaches there quickly. And then we'll dive into the meat of the discussion, which is really when you're trying to put these three things together, what are some of the challenges that arise and how do you solve those, right? And what are the common sort of problems that we hear throughout our work with our customers as well as through our careers? What is that we see and how do we solve that in an effective way? So that's the idea. Hopefully, we'll cover some interesting thoughts and strategies. And if you have any questions, again, please put them into the Q&A channel and we'll try and address them as much as we can. So back to you, Tyler.
So let's start with understanding our customers.
Yeah.
This looks a little cut off.
Yeah.
So
let's
go ahead and
let's see if we can talk through it. Yeah.
Yep.
So we talked about understanding your customers. So essentially, when you're trying to figure out your customer base that you're working with, there's a number of different ways that you typically slice the customers. And these are typically done in a way that groups common buying patterns, common support patterns, etc., together, so you can actually deploy a specific strategy with that group or segment of people or individuals or organizations. Now, this is a broad set of categories here. Demographic, firmographic is one of the most common ways that we do things. Geographic, of course. By location. So when we talk about geographic, we're talking about location, language, culture, transportation, travel time, climate. Like these are all aspects of geographic territories when we start to break those down. Right? And when we talk about firmographic data, you look at a company, B2B or B2C scenarios, the type of vectors will vary. But if you're looking at B2B, industry, employee size, annual revenue, right? All of these are various aspects of how you might segment your customers. And there's a number of things listed. I won't go into each one of those, but I think the key idea here also is that as you look at each of these segments and their journeys that they go through in terms of their interaction with your organization, it can actually be different from one customer segment to another. As an example, your SMB type sales motion might be very different than your enterprise type sales motion, right? And so when you think about the journey of an SMB customer with a single decision maker, etc., that interaction would be very different than a multi-decision maker RFP process in an enterprise sort of a setup. And so the idea here is, as you segment your customers, is to develop a customer journey, the journey that the customer goes through. And it's important, I think, very important to not build this journey the way that you will sell to them, but more really understand the interaction from the customer standpoint, right? One of the common mistakes that we see made is, okay, here is our selling motion, and therefore we'll sort of project that onto the customer and not really try to understand the buying motion that the customer is going through. So it's very important to sort of understand the journey from a customer's perspective. How do they discover your company? How do they understand your products? How do they make a decision, consider how they're going to buy it? And when they do buy it, how do they implement it? How do they get supported and so on? So Once the segments are built, the journey is identified, then you're sort of trying to understand the complexity of that interaction. So here's a quick way to kind of group them into 4 buckets, and it's very common in SaaS to sort of think about the complexity of this interaction in these ways. But really, the 2 vectors that you're looking at is what is the average deal size, and how much effort does it take to acquire and support this customer. And when we talk about that complexity, it could be a combination of cost of acquisition or support, specialist knowledge required, number of decision makers, average deal length. So these are all factors that you could consider when you sort of think about how complex is that interaction. And we also want to think about this not just in terms of sales, but also from a support standpoint, right? Remember, when we're segmenting these customers, depending on the journey and the stage that they're in, the interaction and the complexity of that interaction may be different. So it may be easy to go and purchase something online, but to implement it may require specialist knowledge, right? And so you really have to sort of bring these 3 ideas together in terms of segmenting your customers, identifying the journey, and then matching that to the complexity of the interaction that you're sort of looking at. Once you've done this process, and this is also where a lot of the challenges come in, so we'll discuss some of those things, like how do you get clean data when you're dealing with demographic or firmographic information, and so on and so forth. But the idea here is that the data that you're looking at supports these ways and means in which you're sort of segmenting customers and so on. Let's move on to the next slide. Now that you've identified those 3 things, the next thing is really build a strategy for how you match the resources available in the organization using various models and programs to support the customer through that journey. And keep in mind, again, we're not just talking about sales. We're talking about sales support, everything in that revenue cycle, discovery all the way to the customer being an advocate and a recurring customer, right? So you have to sort of think about that journey. This is super important in the new world of RevOps or revenue operations, right? Because you're not siloed, and that is one of the other challenges that we will discuss later on. You're not siloed into marketing, sales, and customer support. That model has changed considerably over the last few years into this sort of end-to-end revenue model. And so therefore you can't be thinking in silos. You have to sort of think about this in that entire revenue cycle, everything that it takes to sort of support that revenue cycle. And when we talk about models and programs, we have the very common models that are employed, which is a direct model. You call somebody, you pitch them the product, and they decide to buy, you give them a demo, etc. So that's sort of the direct model. We have also the partner-based model, which is working with a network of partners to interact with your customers. Ultimately, whoever is buying your product buys them through a network of partners. It could be entirely online or a combination of any of these things. It could be online for certain segments of customers, and it could be direct or partner-led for other segments of the customers. Events and retail. So these are common models that are used today in sort of reaching out to customers and meeting them on their journey. And when you do that, of course, you can employ a number of different programs, right? And these programs have different techniques, strategies, approaches, and there is quite a lot of them. So this is not meant to be an exhaustive list of programs. But inbound versus outbound motions, a sales-led motion versus a product-led motion, right? And these are all very common things that you would hear in a SaaS environment. Certainly, a lot of our customers are in that space. And when you're talking about things like support and customer success, there it could be a community-based approach, a pooled approach, a dedicated approach. So there's a number of different programs and strategies that can be employed to meet the customer in their journey, through their interactions with the business. So again, think about this more broadly, and what you might find is that depending on the stage that the customer is in, depending on the stage of the journey that they're in, different strategies may be employed, right, to be the most effective way in which to support the customer. So even though a sales motion might be online, as I said, the support motion or the implementation motion might actually require more detailed, sort of more involved, complex interactions. So you're sort of understanding the strategy that you're going to employ. You already have an understanding of the customer. The third part of this is, of course, bringing together the people, process, and technology within your organization to make that happen, right? So how do you deploy the resources that you have, which is the people? How many people do you need? What kind of roles do you need them in to support the journey? And how do you skill them up? How do you train them? And also, what kind of technology do you use to support that journey, right? So these are some of the things that you have to consider as you're bringing together your actual ability to execute on that strategy. And of course, your goal is you want to set objectives, you want to set quota, you want to set targets, and then continuously try and improve the productivity with the idea that you're trying to drive the highest contribution margin out of the territory, if you will, right? So again, when we think about a territory, it's not just a list of accounts, right? It's actually these three things coming together. So you have an approach, a strategy, an understanding of your customers, and an understanding of the resources that you're going to deploy into that territory to meet the customer in their journey. The reason why we wanted to call this out is that in a lot of cases, we get into this motion of, okay, let me just download all the accounts that is in the CRM, put them in a spreadsheet, and just allocate the different salespeople I have to it, and voila, you've got territory. That is the physical motion that you're going through, but it is very important to sort of understand why are we doing this? What's the point of doing this? And how do we find the right data in order for us to sort of build this strategy and support it, right? So that hopefully that sets the stage for the next discussion that we're going to have.
Yeah, I think the important part there too is also that territory isn't what you would classically think of as just sales only, but you might have seen in this that there's like customer supports in there, success, marketing has its own little semblance of territories, right? So this is definitely it goes beyond just sales.
Yeah. And it's also important to understand that when you pick up a specific customer or an account, they could belong to multiple territories. They could belong to a marketing segmentation, which is different than how sales would look at segmentation versus how customer success would look at it. So an account could belong to multiple territories for each stage in the customer journey, and that's perfectly all right. Right? And we tend to sort of try and stick to this idea that an account can only sit in one territory, and therefore everybody must align on that territory. While that's a noble idea, I don't think it actually helps optimize your organization to deliver the right experience to the customer at the end of the day.
So let's talk about some of these challenges here. And the way we've broken this down is there's just like some general territory challenges that you see across all your different segmentation. And then there's some segment specific challenges that will arise as you start to look at how do I break this up by geo or by firmographic data, like employees or employees is top of mind.
Industry.
Anyway,
Yeah,
industry. Thank you. That's the one I wanted. But what's interesting, and you had just brought this up, and we were going to talk about this, is really forcing segmentation is kind of one of these challenges, and we see it a lot where it's sales says that this is the Northwest geo. We're going to force this because this is what we've done, and we were always going to do this. Yet either resources aren't there to support it. It doesn't make sense with your buyer journey. and marketing or CS doesn't also look at it the same way, right? And so for me, forcing segmentation is one of those. It's like, let's go back all the way to the beginning for each, organization, understand what that buyer journey is and what makes sense in terms of segmentation, and then segment.
Right.
And
I
go
think
ahead.
the other thing to consider here is that a way of doing things at the beginning of you developing a market may actually be entirely different than how you might approach that market once it matures, right?
Yep.
And so, if you're growing in Europe and you have no brand presence and all of that, you might actually employ different techniques and different ways of organizing your customers there that may not make sense 5 years in when you have a presence, when you have customers, and so on. So the segmentation model has to evolve with your business, and how you think about building these territories have to evolve with your business so that you can continue to support your customers the right way. Right?
Yeah, and I think a very simple example of this would be US-based company, very early stages, no real resources in EMEA or APAC or LATAM. There's no sense in starting to segment out all of these customers and bringing in all this stuff if you don't have resources to support that.
Right.
And because guess what? That's going to come, right? Like you are going to evolve into that strategy, but today, don't force that on the organization. Keep it simple and
And
no way.
some of the crazy things that we have seen is, for instance, using some half-brained idea like the first letter of the company name to segment them into territories. When you start doing that, you're not really thinking about the strategy, how you're going to deal with the customer journey, how you're effectively going to support it. You're simply thinking about allocating a bunch of accounts to a bunch of salespeople, right? And that's the model. So I've seen people use all these kinds of ways, and when you're doing something like that, you've just basically lost the idea of why you're doing it. You just want to give like 5 accounts to a rep and go away, right? And as RevOps leaders and strategy leaders, you really need to make sure that the reason why you're doing this is to support the customer journey. And if you can't clearly explain why a territory is built a certain way, what's the strategy, who's the segment we're going after, and what's the model that we're using. If you can't explain that very quickly, then you don't have a semblance of a territory. You just have a list of accounts that you've allocated to somebody, right? And so I think that's important. The other thing I wanted to call out is, more often than not, we tend to be very focused on internal data. So you might actually look at just the accounts in your CRM to start doing your planning, and you get into selection bias with that. And when you start looking at the data and not incorporating sort of third-party data or an outside view of all of the different ideas that we talked about in terms of segmentation, you have this risk of an incredible selection bias that impacts your ability to effectively meet customers, right? So if you've been really successful at selling to medical companies and 90% of the accounts in your CRM is all medical companies, when you do your data analysis, you're going to find that you are really successful in the medical business. But what does that mean outside of that industry, right? And so on and so forth. So it's important as we sort of look at the data that not to be sucked into sort of the selection bias of internal data that you're looking at, right, for all of these analysis.
And pretty much like the basic recommendation there is make sure you incorporate data outside of your CRM into your initial analysis.
That's right.
Full stop.
That's right. And you want to talk a little bit about corporate family misses and what that's about?
I do, but since I started at the bottom of this list, I'm kind of now like working my way up, and siloed planning will be easy. If you are sitting like at the very beginning of planning and it's just sales that's sitting in a meeting talking about what the go-to-market strategy is going to be, you're missing out on the broader organization, right? RevOps is up and coming because it's now needing to be marketing, CS. Everybody needs to be in a room together discussing what this is. And sure, the customer journeys might be different, but making sure that everybody is talking and discussing how all these pieces are going to fit together will be super important. So there's that. And then tenured reps with changes in segmentation. This one I see come across a lot of the customers as they start to change territory models, and you have reps that have been at companies for 5+ years that have owned accounts for 5 years. And as you evolve that segmentation or evolve your go-to-market, it's really difficult to remove accounts from them because it doesn't make sense. But one of the things I've seen successful is a stepped approach. So taking accounts and moving them into the appropriate buckets, and maybe not like completely pulling the entire territory from these reps initially, or starting to really position the territory as like accounts are actually owned by the territory and reps get assigned to the territory. A subtle difference, but it's just like a change in perspective. So I'm a rep, I get assigned to this territory that we built. And if we built a territory correctly based on the previous slides, then I think you'll have an actual territory that is aligned with whatever that strategy is.
Right. Actually, Charlie has an interesting question. He said, if you're an early stage company and you've just hired your first sales rep, at what point do you start thinking about territories? Right, and that I think is tags on to a very interesting question about the maturity of your organization, right, as you're growing. And again, if you look at that question, really the challenge there is the resources that you have at your disposal for how you're going to reach the customer journey, right? And so when you're starting out, maybe the three ideas that we talked about, you understand your customer, but the strategy that you may be employing is an inbound strategy, right? You want to do marketing and get inbound leads to come in, or you want somebody to close those inbound leads as they come into the organization. So the strategy will really inform how you're going to think about it. And if you don't have the resources to execute it, like Tyler was saying earlier, you expand into a market, you don't have a lot of people there, you might have to adopt a strategy that actually allows you to match the people to the strategy to the customer base, right? And this is where those three things are super important to come together. And so you might actually not think about a territory when you're that young in the process, and the strategy that you're using doesn't differentiate between different kinds of customers, right? And you don't need to have a different sales motion or a support motion for different kinds of customers, because you simply don't have the resources to execute it, right? And so this goes back to the earlier discussion we were having, is kind of matching strategy, resources, and customers. And as you bring them together, that'll sort of inform the approach that you're going to take. And at an early stage like this, if it's one size fits all for everybody, then you don't need territories, because you have the same approach for everybody, and you can use a pooled mechanism or a round robin or something like that to actually deliver the workload between all of those resources. So that's a great question, Charlie. Thanks for putting that on.
Corporate family misses.
Yes.
This is your favorite one. I think I'll just tee it up.
So in terms of corporate family, I think one of the key things that you deal with, especially when you're trying to sell to large organizations, and when you're selling to large organizations, of course, they are not just one entity. They are potentially multiple entities spread across the world. They are different buying centers even within that entity. For instance, a company could be headquartered in New York, but they buy technology in Dallas, right? And so when you're thinking about a group of companies or an organization that is large, then it's important, one, to make sure that you have the data that allows you to analyze that, understand that this is a group of companies. Two, understand how they buy, right? And so if they have a specific technology buying center and you sell technology, you probably want to approach the customer where they buy versus allocating the account to a rep in New York who's not working the buying center in Dallas. So that's why we talk about this sort of journey mapping, because that informs the process on how you actually handle complex organizations like that. And we also want to make sure that we can deal with if it's a really large corporate family, we also want to understand how we actually sell to them. For instance, take McDonald's and their franchisees, right? Certain things are bought at the headquarters, and certain things are bought at the individual locations. So does location matter, right? And so when you're thinking about this family of accounts, how do you actually consider them? How do you actually think about them in the buying journey? And that will really inform how you build territories and how you consider corporate families in that process. And this is typically not an issue if your sale is very transactional and you're selling something which really doesn't matter what the corporate family is. But as you build an outbound sales motion, for example, trying to sell into large enterprises, this becomes a very important sort of aspect of how you sell into them. So in terms of how do you solve for this, get a really good data source that will tell you information about companies and their relationships to other entities. So D&B or ZoomInfo or one of those third-party data sources would actually help you inform that. And then really take that data, because that third-party data is what we call legal structures, and really transform that into your buying behavior, right? And this is the mistake that we see with corporate families, is that you simply use the legal structure, and when you do that, you will allocate the company headquartered in New York to the New York rep, but the buying is happening in Dallas, right? And so that kind of mismatches are very likely to occur. So it's important to sort of understand the legal structure of the company, but then also map it to their buying experience and what their buying journey or their support journey would look like. So it's not a one-size-fits-all model where you can simply go to a third party, get the data, and away you go. There are these nuances to consider. So use those carefully is I think the point that we're trying to make here. And Tyler touched a little bit on tenured reps and so on. And obviously, the idea here is that as an organization matures, typically we start with everybody picking up accounts. There's really no rhyme or rhythm to it. The sales managers just assign the next account to the available rep, and you start to build a very unstructured sort of grouping or no strategy around how you're actually allocating these accounts. And so when you deal with reps that are growing through the organization, it's also important to sort of think about how you support their growth, the success of those reps as they gain experience, as they gain, how do you change the segmentation to allow them to tackle more business and also more challenging scenarios. So that's, I think, an important consideration as you're building territories.
And just Charlie was asking if I can expand on the assigning accounts to a territory versus a rep, and really I think it's a nuance. If you really think about like Salesforce and the architecture on a tactical level, the users become account owners, right? And that's how you kind of own an account. And from the perspective of an account actually being owned by a territory, so you go, okay, rep, you are assigned to territory 1, and there's a collection of accounts that are essentially owned by that territory. And it's really just a different way to talk about it than just saying you own these accounts. It's more of an assignment, and it feels a little bit more like temporary. There's less attachment to, I own this account, this is my thing. And so when you do change up up your go-to-market structure, which might affect where accounts are allocated. So think about like, oh, we've got now a public sector sales motion, right? Because it's vastly different than the regular pieces. And you've got a rep that has owned in a government account for a long time, but it doesn't make sense to continue to keep it with that rep because that rep's not going to be working government accounts anymore. It's going to be the public sector team. It just makes those changes a lot easier and the disruption easier to kind of go through. So.
At the end of the day, in your CRM, you open up an account, you have an owner, right? And that's what the rep sees. But all of the things that we talked about, the strategy around the territory, like how is it coming together, all of that gets missed in the discussion, right? And I think that's what you're getting at. That level of indirection actually helps you put focus on the territory, the strategies you're going to employ on the territories, the quota that's set on the territory. And you may have people come in and out of that territory, and that's perfectly fine. But as a business, you have a clean understanding of what you're trying to achieve with that segment of customers and the strategy that you're using.
Okay. All right, Bob, we got 5 minutes on this slide because we got one more after this. And we just talked about some of the common challenges that arise when you segment your accounts on different criteria, whether that's geo, firmographic, technographic, and value-based. Those are the top 4 that we see in terms of B2B stuff. And we know we called out some stuff at the beginning that was a little bit different, but let's start with geographic, and we can kind of just run through this list and just talk about some of the challenges as well as how you might solve them or deal with them.
Right.
The first one, and this is really big with, you're the Northwest rep, the Bay Area rep, or even getting down into, like, a lot of times we'll see this in like the New York metro area or Manhattan where you own a postal code. It's really difficult to balance the inbound lead volume when a rep is assigned a specific postal code. Marketing it can't be perfect with like, I'm going to make sure I get everybody at least one lead today at each postal code. So that becomes really difficult to balance that. And if you're an inbound heavy company, you might want to think about doing things a little bit differently than breaking down into postal codes.
Using geographic territories in that case might not be the right approach, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that is exactly right. But it might make sense at the geo level, like the large regions, EMEA, APAC, or even maybe splitting along time zones because you don't want reps in the West Coast working East Coast times.
Yep.
So those are easier to balance, those lead volumes, but getting down in the more specific you get, the harder it will be to balance that volume of leads. As well as some of the other things that I've seen crop up are propensity to buy and then ICP density. So like kind of what do I mean by that? Really on the propensity to buy, it's really difficult to balance geo-based territories on the sets of accounts that are wanting to buy your product. So a great example would be like if you're selling into financial services, that's going to be really dense. There's going to be a lot of accounts in New York metro area. So if you're assigned, I don't know, TOLA, that might not be a great territory in the sense that there's not a lot of accounts that are really looking to buy your product. And the same thing with density, like ICP density. There might not be a lot of this ICP or this type of customer you're looking for in a specific territory. And so you're starting to gerrymander your territories in different ways to try and make things work for your reps. And it's kind of
I think the key call out here is really try and justify why a geographic territory is needed for your business, right?
Yeah.
It's a natural way for strategy people to think in terms of geographic boundaries. But I think the world has changed to a point where you really need to understand why geography makes sense. And also, you're not constraining yourself into a geographic model when you don't need to. right? And I think that's the big call out from like all of the challenges that you're calling out there, Tyler. And when we talk about firmographic, of course, the number one thing is data, data, data. And
Yep.
the question there becomes, where do you find this data? Typically, third-party data sources are a great way of enhancing, enriching your data. But there's also a lot of input that is coming from your folks. And so how do you manage the data quality of the fields that you're going to use to make these firmographic decisions? So if employee count or annual revenue is important for how you segment, what kind of data quality controls are you going to put into those fields to make sure that they are actually maintained properly? And the other question is, how often do you update that data, right? And when you update those the data, obviously want the freshest data in your CRM. But when you do update it, that causes issues around segmentation and territories. So do you keep moving territories around every time you update the data? So those are questions that you will have to answer. And the approach that we've taken is keep the freshest data in your CRM, but have a policy that you only update territories every quarter or at the end of the year. And so that's important to sort of set those policies up front, both from a data quality standpoint as well as how they impact segmentation and how they impact the building of the territories. With the other approach, which is technographic data, which is anything that that you might use, like for instance iOS users versus Android users, and if you segment it from a technology standpoint, just keep in mind that change is constant, right? So you're going to have to deal with the volatility of that information. And it's going to be much more volatile than firmographic data. So it may be challenging, but again, there are data sources that you can potentially employ for that. But in terms of volatility of the data you might use for building these territories, it goes sort of left to right. The geography doesn't change as much, but firmographic and technographic data do change. So have a strategy around how often you update the data and how do you update the territories related to that. You want to talk a little bit about value-based, and then we can wrap up?
Yeah. So the big thing for me on value-based is people will slap everything over a certain level of ARR. This is a lot of this on customer success side of things, particularly is like, okay, if you're over this much ARR, you get enterprise level support. And sure, it's simple to do that, but it typically misrepresents total potential. You could totally have Microsoft come in and it could be one small team that bought your software, and you've passed that off to the SMB services customer success team, and you're not really thinking about, well, what's the long-term total potential in this account. So really wanting to, when you really think about the territories on CS, think about it more than just what is the ARR, but total potential, and also complexity. And then the high ARR don't always correlate. And for me, on the CS side, I still think it's super important to treat those customers that are kind of this middle to high ARR like area, even though they might be still complex. I want to give them the treatment because we want to keep them and so on and so forth. So I think it's really important to just take a step back and understand more than just ARR and what do customers look like when you want to segment based on value. Anything else there?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head there. The type of customer and their journey and the complexity of their interactions, all three things are important as you put together these territories.
That's right. So let's take us to the end of evolving the strategy and embracing best practices. And most importantly, we want to stay agile, because guess what? At the very beginning of this, you talked about it changing all of the time. We're going to be here today and maybe next month we're going to be somewhere else. So what can we do to stay agile?
Right. And again, this is a maturity of the organization. So as things get complex, as you segment your customers, and there are many of them with different combinations of strategies, things certainly become complex. You might not be able to handle all of this on a spreadsheet. right? And so I think that's the point at which you can start to look at automation to sort of help you with that process. Shameless plug for Fullcast here, but the idea is that you want an agile sort of process by which you can continue to evolve these definitions of territories. And you don't need to be stuck to an yearly process, right? And we have a lot of our customers that change and respond to the market on a quarterly basis. So as things change, they're changing their approach, they're changing their strategy. So feel free to sort of look at automation that will actually help you be a lot more agile in terms of how you plan, how you put together the strategy, and more importantly, how do you execute it, right? And when you execute it, you don't want to be stuck with a 6-month or a 6-week process for getting all of this stuff deployed in your CRM and your routing rules and all of that stuff that you need from a technology standpoint. You want that agility to be able to just push a button and make a change, push a button, and have it be deployed in your transactional systems, right? So automation becomes key for driving transparency through the process, driving agility through the process, and that's really the one of the key things that you need in order to keep up with this complexity that we talked about as you mature through an organization.
For me, when starting to think about increasing this agility, the two things that you can do today are defining and enforcing those data policies as well as the rules of engagement. Those are things that anybody here on this call can do and just get them documented and make them really clear to reps and enforce them into the CRM. If you need a piece of data to split your territories, that should be required upon creation of an account.
And the key here is also not to boil the ocean, right? And you, based on the way in which you're segmenting, just find those 2 fields that you need to clean up and focus on those. I've seen so many broad cathedral building data projects that never actually achieve their objectives. So we'd be very focused. I need employee field to be clean and I need the address field to be clean. Okay, just focus on those because those are the 2 things you need for your go-to-market strategy, right? So be focused. I think that'll help you sort of scale the problem and deal with the issues rather than like some giant data project that will take years to complete.
We also have a territory planning ebook. So if you wanted to check that out, you can. There's more of kind of what we talked about today in the ebook. That's available on our website under resources at fullcast.io. If you have any questions, I think we got a couple minutes left, so you can drop those in Q&A. I do see some stuff in here, so we'll kind of address these while anybody else that has any questions, you can drop them in. But Charlie also asks, how do we deal with industries that are really difficult? And what's the best way to kind of really deal with industry segmentation?
Yeah, everybody has their own taxonomy, and that's the problem, right? And as you can see, government has their own taxonomy, the NAICS code, the SIC codes, and that's a model that has worked for government, may not always work for you. And a lot of the data sources also give you multiple industries for specific accounts. Like my favorite example, you just take Microsoft and what are they? Are they a software company? Are they a retail company? Are they a hardware company? What do they do, right? It's very hard to identify it. So just like we talked about with account relationships, industry, you've got to arrive at a taxonomy that works for you and stick to it, right? And that's the important part there. A lot of them, LinkedIn has a pretty nice industry model. You can use the government industry model if that works for you. And the good thing about the government industry model is that there is a lot of statistics that gets reported based on that model, right? So if you want demographic or firmographic data, There's a lot of data that comes out from various agencies that map to that model. But you can also translate very easily if you reduce that down to what the SIC codes are or the NAICS codes are. And as long as you have those, you can actually evolve your taxonomy to support the business that you need based on how you sell. And that's I think it's also another thing that you evolve and mature as you grow.
And the last question I see here is, does Fullcast support the heavy analytics often involved in planning territories / are you a one-stop shop to plan and share territories with reps?
So the heavy analytics part, we are not a data warehouse platform, so we don't actually do historical reporting and things like that. But what we do is work with a data warehouse and pull those numbers in. So we don't actually calculate and store data and do all the historical calculations. But once they're done in your data warehouse, we can pull them in to do the analysis that you need.
The proper customer success answer is it depends on what you mean by heavy analytics, because there's a lot of stuff that you can do within Fullcast, and there's some stuff that we say, hey, that's probably better done in a BI tool like Tableau or Looker, or using data from your data warehouse.
Right. And in terms of building and shipping territories with reps, yes, that's what we do. That's our bread and butter.
Yep. I don't see any other questions, so I think we can pass it back to Angelica.
Hello. Bala, Tyler, that was awesome. Thank you for such an informative session. I know our audience has got great value from your insights and wisdom. Just a quick reminder to everyone who's watching that the amazing slide deck, along with the recording and any ebooks or articles mentioned, will be made available on the previous event page on the MSP website before the end of the day. We'll also send out an email. Just want to thank Bala and Tyler again for their time, as well as everyone who attended. So be sure to check out the recording, and we'll see you at the next event. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.